Hello. Today I'm going to look at how we can get free plants from stones, pips and seeds. We're going to look at where we get our seeds, pips and stones. We're then going to look at a couple of points to consider before going on to planting our stones, pips and seeds. So let's start with, where do we get our stones, pips and seeds? Well, it's simple. When we buy fruit, a lot of these fruit that we buy contain seeds. So here I have an apple, and inside an apple, as we all know, we've got pips, the seeds. And if we buy things like peaches, plums, even tomatoes, there are seeds inside that we can collect and then use in our garden. So before we look at what we need to consider, I'm going to eat this apple so that we've got an apple core and the seeds to plant. Okay, so we know where to get our seeds in their various forms. But what do we need to consider? Now, first of all, when we're actually buying our fruit and vegetables and so on, to get our seeds, I would thoroughly recommend buying organic. Simply, well, for two reasons. One, organic will probably be better for you because the fruit and vegetables and so on have not been treated with nasty chemicals. And the other thing is this: quite often fruit and produce which is not organic often has sterile seeds, so planting the seeds is a waste of time. What else do we need to think about? The other thing is this: certain plants are crossed. So the apple you saw earlier will have been crossed with possibly a different variety. So when we plant the seeds, we're really not quite sure what we're going to get. It may not necessarily resemble, or the fruit may not resemble, the apple that I've just eaten. So if you want purebred fruits and you want to know exactly what the variety is, I would suggest you go to your garden shop and buy either the seeds or the plant itself to be sure. But this method we're talking about today, where we get free seeds, it's a bit like Russian roulette. We're really not quite sure what we're going to get, what's going to grow, which is part of the fun. Now, the last consideration I want to talk about today is a thing called stratification. Now, again, a fancy way of saying something which is really quite simple. Certain seeds, particularly where we have seeds of certain plants such as peaches, nectarines, apricots, cherries, plums. In fact, we have what we call a stone, which is a very big, hard seed. And usually these seeds need to go through a process to bring the seed out of its dormancy. Inside the hard shell is a seed, which is, in fact, sleeping quite happily. And to bring it out of this state of dormancy, it has to have a couple of things. One, it usually needs to have a certain amount of moisture, a certain amount of water, so that the outer shell will expand and open. And also, rather strangely, a period of cold. Now, in nature this happens normally because the seeds are in the ground, and during the winter the temperatures go down and it usually rains, so the seed gets the water it needs to crack open the stone shell, and 2, a period of cold to wake up the seed from its dormancy. So what we can do is, if we plant it in the garden and we have cold winters here, it will go through this period of stratification. But if you live in an area where your winter isn't particularly cold, you may have to cheat a little. And the way we do this is simply by putting the plants on a bit of kitchen towel on a plate, dampen it. It doesn't need to be soaking wet, it needs to be damp, and put it in the fridge. Usually we would surround it with a plastic bag, ensure that the seeds, if you have a number of them, aren't touching each other or the plastic bag, because the fear here is developing some kind of mold or fungus which will kill the seed. And you can leave it in there for anything up to 3 months. It may only be a week or 2, but it may be up to 3 months, and it will start showing signs of life, and at that point you can then plant it in a pot or in the garden if you wish. But that's rather complicated, and I'm a lazy gardener, and I like things to be simple. So today I'm going to show you how I do it in my garden, the lazy Steve way. So let's take a look at that. Now I'm in another part of the garden, and it's in this space here where we have this hedge, and I have what's left of my apple, the apple core. Now what you can do is just take the seeds out and plant them individually, or you can be lazy like me, and I've made a little hole just here, just under the surface of the soil, and I'm just going to drop it in there and cover it up. Now one thing to note, we are in the month of November, and normally when we think about certainly planting seeds, we tend to think of planting things in spring and so on, but because of this idea of stratification, not necessarily for the apple pips here, but I have another thing that I want to plant, which is a Mirabelle plum. I've saved a number of seeds, as I said, from some Mirabelle plums that I got from, in fact, from neighbours. And what I need to do is basically just get them out of my little jar here, and what I'm going to do is plant them directly in the soil. Again, as I said, we're in the northern hemisphere, it's November, so we're just basically very much into autumn. The weather is surprisingly nice today, so that's why I decided to demonstrate on this lovely sunny autumn day. So here we have the seeds. Some of them are stuck to little bits of kitchen paper that I had in my little jar here to keep them dry. The kitchen paper will just disintegrate in the ground too. But these little seeds need this stratification. They're in a hard shell which needs to absorb water, break open, and we need a little period of coldness, which will be the winter, which will wake up the seed inside. And again, very simply, we just plant it in the soil. Literally, I'm just pushing it about 1 centimetre under the soil there and compacting the soil over the top. So that's straight into the soil, as we do with most of these things. We can also put it into a pot. Some people prefer this. So all we do here, I've got a few twigs and so on the bottom here to allow for drainage. Drainage is extremely important to stop any kind of mould forming, mould and fungus. So I'm going to fill this up most of the way. Very simply, you can use garden soil, potting soil. people use sand and various other things. The idea is that it's, as I said, a cool, moist environment without being soaking. So again, as I said, the drainage is important. So here, I'm literally going to take a few more of these seeds. I said they're all attached to bits of kitchen paper, but let's show you close up. I'm going to come over to the camera a little. So here we have our soil. Literally we take each of these seeds, as I said, they're covered in bits of kitchen paper, separate them quite well. Need a little bit of space so they're not touching each other or the sides of the pot. Literally put them in like that, and then we're going to cover them with a little bit more soil. And of course, as with the other seeds that we put in the ground, we're going to water them nicely. Even if the water, well, I say the ground is well watered, even though it may just have rained, it's always a good idea to water afterwards, because that will close up any air holes and so on that have been caused by the planting process. So there we are. We keep our fingers crossed, and hopefully in the ground or in our pot, come springtime, we'll have some baby trees which in a few years will give us lots of lovely free fruit. Just a little footnote. Remember, when you're planting in your garden and you are planting your plants in the definitive spot where you want them, I would always plant more than one seed to maximize your chances of something germinating and growing, because a number will not germinate, they'll fail in some way, or they may be eaten by rodents or whatever. The other thing is, the seeds we put in the pot, they need to be transplanted to somewhere in the garden or into a very, very big pot individually once they reach about, so big, so I would say probably about 15 centimeters or 6 inches high. That's it. So enjoy your free plants.